Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I am delighted to welcome an accomplished wellness entrepreneur from Washington, D.C., Mr. Jahmaal Marshal. Jahmaal, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Ash. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Jahmaal is the founder and chief executive officer of Listen Then Speak LLC. He has empowered countless individuals to optimize their time and safeguard their mental well being. Jahmaal is now on a mission to revolutionize the work culture of 50,000 companies by 2035, ensuring they thrive from the inside out. So, Jahmaal, before we talk about burnout and mental well being, tell me a little bit about your own journey and what got you interested in this area.
Oh, you went there. You want to know that question? Um, you know, there's quite a few things that impacted that, and I would say it started long before I went into the corporate or the nonprofit space. It started as a child, um, and so as a child, and I have to be careful because some of this may go over the head of the audience.
Yeah.
But I grew up in a home of one parent that was absolutely divine,
Mm,
and
mm,
another parent that I would deem mean enough to be Satan himself.
mm,
So my father, unfortunately, was a alcoholic, also a drug addict,
mm.
heroin specifically. And so that created a lot of unpredictability in the home. And growing up like that, I found a way to not kick up any dust or trouble the waters. Because when he was in that state of mind, he could be so unpredictable. I said, okay, there's no control. So how can I control this?
Yeah.
So I controlled that by being the answer man, being the excellent student, being as good of an athlete as I could be, being someone who was at times a surrogate spouse, a surrogate father.
Mm,
And that filtered its way into my professional life.
mm.
So let's frame forward. I'd already come out of the government and I was starting work in a nonprofit and as a one of three senior counselors in an organization where there was a lot of work that had gone through a split. So that means we lost half of our staff. And so you have this person who has really worked through a lot of their trauma, is now actually helping other people.
Mm.
But as a counselor, I remember being pulled into the office by my director. And he says, we feel that there are not enough people that have access to you. And Ash, I thought to myself, that you have got to be kidding me. I'm the first one to get to work and the last one to
Mhm.
leave.
Mm,
I've done everything in my power to make sure each of our clients here and
mm,
each of the people who pass through these 45 acres that we sit on have a great experience. But I realized that I was giving people too much access to myself.
mm.
And I left that office and my thoughts were riveting. I had a massive emotions. I was angry. I was sad. I was disillusioned. And I had to think to myself, was there some merit to what he said? And I didn't realize when I'd gone back to take inventory, Jahmaal, you have created this narrative of always being available. Extremely poor
Mhm.
psychological and physical and spiritual hygiene to always
Mm,
be available to everybody. And
mm,
so when you are not available, when you're actually caring for yourself, people think that you are resisting them. They feel offended by it, but
mm.
this is the movie that you wrote. So people are
Amazing.
just playing their role. And
Amazing.
so on the heels of that,
Mm,
I realized that I had to go back, even as a counselor, even as someone who was now in this profession, certified, well
mm.
trained in the clinical, that I still had residual effects, from my own childhood.
Right.
So I put myself through years of masterminds and mentoring and different modalities to develop, actual renew and renew your mind
Yeah.
framework.
Mm,
And that framework has definitely helped me to get to the point now where when I would go back into those spaces,
mm,
I could have not a psychological safety I created for myself,
mm.
but true psychological safety that helped me and my staff to also thrive. But it started from within. And so I realized that I was burning out
Mhm.
because I was saying yes to everything and things I didn't even have capacity for. But those
Mm.
yeses were rooted in a fear of rejection. It wasn't a motivation to succeed. It was a motivation and a fear of failure that led me to say those yeses. I hope that's
Amazing.
helpful.
Absolutely. Well, what a great response. Thank you. So, Jamal, let's talk about burnout and mental well-being, which is an area of your specialization. What are some of the biggest challenges organizations face when addressing mental health at work?
Ooh, that's a huge one. I think one of the biggest challenges is actually seeing the staff as human.
Hmm.
And if you think about here, I know you're in the East, I'm here in the West, but most of the workplaces, whether corporate or nonprofit, are still kind of conquered under that Western mindset, the industrial age
Yeah.
mindset. And so we are very much objects of productivity,
Mm.
whether you like it or not. And so I think seeing staff at every level, whether bottom line, mid-level managers, senior leaders to C-suite leaders, as actual human beings, who have a mind, who have a soul, who have a spirit, who have a hierarchy of needs, is one of the biggest challenges because we want to get the job, the project done. We have to push out specific things.
Mm.
And a lot of organizations, believe it or not, are not lean.
Mm.
When you talk about productivity, we're thinking, how much can we get done? Efficiency says, how much can we get done
Mm.
with less turmoil,
Mm.
with less stress, using a whole lot less access? Where do we chew the fat? And so I think that's one of the biggest things is that leaders, everyone who's in leadership is not always a leader.
Correct.
And some leaders' minds have not been trained
Hmm.
to see their people as their greatest asset. They may have it in rhetoric, but
Yeah,
they don't have it in reality.
absolutely. And based on all the work that you do, what are some of the top symptoms of burnout that individuals or leaders should be watching out for?
Oh man, I'm gonna actually go really heavy right off the top. I'm also a podcast host myself. My podcast right now is called
Hmm.
Listen and Speak. It'll be changing into the Leaders Burnout Blueprint,
Hmm.
but I get 30% of my clients do that, and health is a big thing.
Yeah.
Most of my clients are either in their 40s, 50s to 60s. So these are senior leaders within the corporate
Yeah.
space, and shingles is a big thing. I didn't realize the correlation between shingles and
Mm.
stress, and so that is huge. Uh, Burnout is usually the on-ramp to all sorts of different health issues. And so that's one. Two, high irritability.
Mm.
And the way it manifests itself, at least the way it did in me, is irritability with those closest to you. And
Mm.
so if at work you may be a rock star, you may be crushing it externally, but
Yeah.
getting crushed on the inside. And then the people closest to you and your community and your family have to deal
Mm.
with the brunt of that stress because it's going to go somewhere.
Mm.
Three, another symptom, and this is going to sound a little strange because
Yeah.
we want to get the work done,
Mm.
being the rock star employee,
Mm.
being he or she who is just too dependable.
Mm.
Again, I was the first to get to work, the last to leave. I remember once a long time ago, my director said,
Mm.
I noticed something about you, Jamal.
Mm.
You always answer your phone. And at the time, I mean, this was like 2011, this was years ago. I thought it as a compliment, but looking back, it showed me that I was always available, always on
Mm.
call.
Yeah.
And so when you're always on call, that is a sign that you are actually, fear is your motivator,
Mm.
that you have not yet understood the importance of dialing back and cutting off some access points so that you
Mm.
actually have time to rejuvenate. You go
Mm.
see a personal
Yeah.
trainer. What's the first thing they say? You're looking for that brick house body or that amazing figure, ladies. And the first thing they say is, how much sleep are you getting? And
Mm.
you're usually blown away, like, how much sleep am I getting? Can I just get the workout plan?
I know.
Rest is going to be your number one
Absolutely.
component to fitness, not just physically, but also mentally.
Absolutely. And that's such a great response, Jamal. I mean, you know, I'm 68 years old, but 15 years ago, when the mobile phone came, I said, I'm not going to look at my phone from 7 p.m. onwards. And I don't. So it's a discipline that you got to build in. But thank you for bringing this point up on how important sleep is. My next question is, how do you differentiate between everyday stress and chronic burnout?
Got a great question, Ash. Everyday stresses are things that are out of our control.
Mm.
I live here in Washington, D.C., and this is the seat of the government. I
Yeah.
call it the land of
Yeah.
organized chaos.
Mm.
So,
Mm.
there is so
Yeah.
much that happens here in
Correct.
my own backyard that I have no control over.
Mm.
One of my boundaries is not watching the news. We're
Mm.
either uninformed or misinformed.
Mm. Mm.
There's two sides of the truth,
True.
and then there's the real truth.
Absolutely.
Um, and so everyday stresses, whether it's work stress or business stress, are going to be those things that are outside of your control
Mm.
and those things that maybe happen, habitually. Like, let's just say a
Yeah.
baby, you
Mm.
know, 60% of my clients are women. So a nursing mom has a
Mm.
stress that a young 23-year-old male doesn't have. You
Correct.
know, chronic burnout is when it begins to affect your physical health, your psychological health, your mental health. And it also begins to affect the people around you. You know, those everyday stresses. There's often, you know, when people say, "Hey, just take a nap or take a bubble bath," you cannot sleep off burnout. You cannot vacation off burnout. It is a chronic mental illness, and I want to say illness because I know that word can connote some finality, but
Mm,
it's a chronic issue based on what's going on in your subconscious mind.
mm,
Chronic burnout is more so not about your behavior and your external circumstance. It has to do with what you believe,
mm.
because what you believe will always inform how you behave.
Very interesting. Jamal, what role does emotional intelligence play in preventing burnout and fostering well-being?
Phenomenal question, Ash. Emotional intelligence, as we know by definition, is the ability to manage yourself and to manage your own emotions and to
Mm,
manage the emotions of others. So,
mm,
take, for example, said person who is extremely fearful.
mhm,
Uh, the person who just fear is their motivation, the fear of rejection. They may not have the emotional intelligence to know, not just to say no, because I don't like those little quotes that we see on social media, just say no.
mm,
Let's just be honest, people. Someone that has said yes for 30 plus years of their life is not just going to say no. Their brain neuroplasticity is already telling them the safest thing to do is to say yes.
mm,
And so the role emotional intelligence will play, it will empower you to pause. One of the quotes that I trademark that I say to my clients is that the problem is in the pattern, but the power is in the pause. And
mm,
so when you actually can address those patterns at the root, you have the emotional intelligence to understand your capacity,
mm.
your physical capacity,
Yeah.
your mental capacity, your psychological capacity, as well as the capacity of others. And so
Mm,
not only does it foster well-being within you, man, because I work with a lot of leaders,
mhm,
when you thrive, when Thrive culture is here and it
mm,
starts here,
mm.
it will trickle down to your staff. You
Absolutely.
know, you approach a leader whose staff is burnt out, and a lot of times where there's high turnover, you can best believe that culture lies within the leader themselves.
Mm. Great response. My next question, and we will talk about culture because I know that's an area of interest to you and it's a passion for you. But how can leaders and human resource professionals create a culture that naturally mitigates stress and burnout?
I love that question, and I want to say, especially for leaders that have been in the game for a while, you want to go to the word recreate because it may be that the culture you've already created is a culture of burnout. And
Mm,
it could be that your constituents and those under you on your team are too afraid to tell you.
mm,
And so going back to the drawing board, the change starts with you. You can bring in, you know, and I do this work of consulting and workshops with teams. You can bring in that person, you can check that box,
mm,
but it has to start with you. You have to see the need of when you look at your bottom line, a lot of times we say people lie, but numbers don't.
mm,
And when you see the high turnover and you see, let's just say on the low end, let's do some numbers because I know people that deal in your and my spaces, numbers are all that matter.
mm,
On the low end, for your base most entry level employee, it costs you $24,000 to turn over a new employee. You take when you start losing mid-level managers and senior leaders, that can be anywhere from 24,000 to 96,000. That's a lot of money when it comes to turning over employee
mm,
insurance, onboarding, learning and development. And so you are literally not leaving money on the table. You are literally opening a door and throwing money out the window. And so when you start to even see that, since some people will only respond to numbers, you began to say, what role am I playing in this? And the role the leaders can take is actually first examining himself. There's an
mm,
ancient scripture in the Bible that says, let a man examine himself first. You know,
mm,
when you examine yourself and say, have I taken a role in the how my organization is slowly sinking and headed on a collision course?
mm.
And then when you see that, okay, this is not a culture where people can thrive at every level, how do we then make systemic change from the inside out? Because anybody can modify behavior from without, but if it's not within, the very things you believe within will always make their way to the surface.
Very well said. Very well said. The other perspective I wanted to get from you was, I'm from the boomers generation, and, no one talked about mental health when I was working. And yet today people are beginning to talk. And whenever I speak to people, there is a, a culture of not be wanting to talk about it. There is guilt, there is shame. or being able to express those views. What advice would you give to executives experiencing guilt or shame when it comes to talking about mental health?
Right off the bat, differentiate between the two.
Mm,
Make the dichotomy between what they both are, because I
yeah.
think a lot of times when it comes to guilt and shame, Ash, we see
Mm,
them as synonymous, and they're not. Guilt connotes something that you have done.
mm,
Okay, so let's just say a couple of weeks ago was my birthday week. I am guilty of eating way too much cake.
mhm.
I recently crossed
And why
over.
not? Yes.
No, turned 40. So there were multiple celebrations for my birthday. 40 is a
Mhm.
milestone
Yeah,
year, but let me tell you,
absolutely. Yeah.
I'm in the gym now paying the price. Guilt is something I've done. I'm guilty as charged. Shame says, you know what? You're a glutton. You're a greedy man. You're an unhealthy man. If I take on that identity, that says that's who I am. So again, guilt is what you've done. Shame means this is who you are. And so for leaders, the advice I would give when experiencing guilt or shame is to say, wait a minute. What about first, is this a guilt of a crime I've committed?
Mm,
Two, is it false guilt? you know, based on something that has not been addressed in my subconscious.
mm,
And what of this should I identify with? So when you're prioritizing mental health, learn to make the dichotomy
mm,
between the two.
mm,
And I would say the third, we want to add false guilt in there, because those of us who are perfectionists, those of us who are high performers, we can deal with a lot of false guilt. And when
mm.
false guilt is your motivator, it is a runway train to burnout.
Amazing. What a great response. Thank you. So, Jamal, I'm now going to move to another segment of our conversation, which is, your talk about your mission of revolutionizing work culture for 50,000 companies by 2035. And my first question is, what are some of the key elements of work culture that prioritizes employee well-being and engagement?
Oh, he used the E word. Engagement. Because we talked a lot about well-being.
Mm,
Um, I want to talk about engagement
mm,
because I think when it comes to high tone or turnover, whether here in the West or in the
yeah,
East,
mm,
you have a person long before they exit externally, they've already
mm,
disengaged internally. And I would say for leaders, look for when your loudest employee, mid-level manager, senior leader, whoever they may be,
mm,
when they get quiet, check on them.
mm,
Because that's a direct external uh revealing that they are disengaged, and they're disengaged for a reason.
mm,
And so I think a key element of work culture that prioritizes employee well-being and engagement is actually checking for those who are disengaged,
mhm,
and then paying attention to the data of your employee engagement. I cannot tell you in all honesty, Ash, how many years that I said I don't even feel like doing employee engagement surveys, because I put the data out there. I spend the 45 minutes to an hour to really engage the survey honestly, and then they do nothing about it.
mm,
Let your people know that you're heard. Now, I realize as leaders, you cannot please everyone. That's just not even sustainable. It's not even a reality. But there's hard data in the high. Once something goes over 60%, that's an indication that something is wrong within the organization, within the company, within
mm,
that corporate world. When you pay no mind to that and just choose that we're going to still do exactly what we've been doing, you are then, for lack of better rhetoric, giving your employees and your staff at all levels the finger. And you're saying we don't care. When you share with them that you don't care, they will return serve and say that they don't care either, by disengaging and then leaving. Instead
mm,
of using their lunch breaks to ideate, to get projects done, to move the mission forward, they're using their lunch breaks to look for another job.
mm. Very interesting. Another question that I wanted to ask you was that, while you're talking about the issue of wellness, mental health, well-being in large companies, this is also the age of, startup entrepreneurs and small and medium enterprises. How can small businesses who have limited budgets adopt the principles that you advocate for large corporations?
I love that question. That's a good question out of left field. I think it's actually easier
Mhm.
for
Okay.
smaller companies because one, they're dealing with less bodies, dealing with less layers of
Mhm.
responsibility. It's a
Mhm.
bit of a flatter organization. When you do that, start small so that you build that foundation in the early stages.
Mhm.
Understand the prioritization of your own mental health and
Mhm.
um, and well-being. One thing that I do in my business is not only just working with corporate organizations and some nonprofits. I do work with small business owners because they are leaders as
Yep.
well. There's leadership across the board.
Correct.
And I share with each of them, your business will grow to the degree that you do. And so
Hmm.
you have to prioritize personal development, leadership development. And that's what I do in the executive coaching and counseling, combining those modalities
Hmm.
so that we have a holistic leader who
Hmm.
is able not only to lead, but to also duplicate themselves.
Hmm.
Start off when you're, especially in those smaller stages, that's when you want to prioritize it. I
Hmm.
don't know if you ever heard of Travis Chappell, but here in the West, he's one of the fathers of podcasting,
Hmm.
has grown his business to, I believe, an eight-figure business.
Hmm.
I had him on my podcast. It's going to be airing this year. And he said, that's the thing I prioritize. That's what's made me who I am today is
Hmm.
prioritizing personal development. And so understanding that, of course, we want to buy all the things to market, to scale, to grow the business. But if you're not growing yourself, your business will not grow. And your business may grow
Hmm.
to an extent, but you're still creating a glass ceiling for yourself.
Very interesting. Very interesting. So, time for one more question for you, Jamal. And this question is, what steps can companies take to align their core beliefs and practices that foster inclusivity and wellness?
I would say for companies, whether corporate or nonprofit, um, bring outside help in.
Hmm.
Um, we've heard it said, you want to sit in the echo chamber, and that goes for all of us. As a business owner myself, I'm so grateful for my production team. I'm so grateful for the web team, grateful for different coaches and
Hmm.
consultants in my life that see my blind spots. I'm grateful to have people who I would say I'm a master of the mind.
Hmm. Hmm.
That is my
Yeah.
area of
Hmm.
expertise. I'm grateful for people who know things that I don't.
Hmm.
And I'm not insecure about that. So I would say when we drop the ego and you bring in somebody that can look at things objectively,
Hmm.
because sometimes we can be subject to our own stuff. If you stand in a barn long enough, you
Hmm.
may not understand it. It smells like cat, hair, and it smells like a pig or that horse. When you
Hmm.
just been in it so long, you don't smell it,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know. And so bringing in outside help, that's part of the work I do is I can
Hmm.
see things objectively that leaders can't because they've been in it so long.
Hmm.
That's one of the steps that they can take. Another step when it comes to inclusion and wellness um, is starting from within, you know, understanding that,
Hmm.
you can't force that. We still are who we are. I tell my own clients, and one of the other phrases I've
Hmm.
coined is that, fellas, you can throw on a pair of heels. Ladies, you can throw on a pair, no, fellas, you can throw on a pair of loafers. Ladies, you
Hmm.
can throw on a
Hmm.
pair of heels,
Yeah.
but you still carry you wherever you go. You
Hmm.
carry yourself, your beliefs, your family history, your own history, your psychology, your addictions, your biases. You
Hmm.
still carry those wherever
Yeah.
you go. And so understanding that those things need to be dealt with. And so when
Hmm.
that culture lives within you, it'll live from without in the organization. And
Hmm.
you'll see it, whether it's your small business or your whole company, it will begin to thrive because you took the time to invest in your own personal development, your own leadership development. And
Hmm.
that investment, it may cost some thousands or whatever like that of
Yeah.
dollars, but it's actually priceless because when you start to scale, and you can go on Indeed and see
Hmm.
different things about your company,
Hmm.
that means that you're out here actually doing the work on the front lines.
Hmm. Well
That's
said.
priceless.
Well said. And on that note, Jamal, I just want to say thank you so much for sharing with me your own journey. What an amazing journey you've had. Thank you for talking to me about burnout and mental well-being. We covered a lot of ground about symptoms of burnout, what are the challenges organizations face. We spoke about emotional intelligence. We spoke about how, leaders and HR professionals can help to mitigate stress and burnout. We also had a very interesting conversation on how to manage guilt or shame, and I love the differentiation you created between guilt and shame. That was something new I learned. We also covered your passion of work culture for 50,000 companies, and we covered some very interesting points there as well. Thank you for speaking to me, and all the very best to you.
Thanks, Ash. Before we go,
Yeah.
I do want to just share something with your audience here, because one of the most common questions I get asked is, how do you manage yourself in the midst of having to do so much work and
Mm.
having to manage so many other staff?
Yeah.
I've worked with people from Nike, Zillow,
Mm.
Honda,
Mm.
Amazon. These are people that have a staff of more than 50. And so that's the very reason why I created a burnout mini course.
Mm.
So I give people the bird's eye view on the subconscious mind internally to
Mhm.
take practical steps to not only tackle the subconscious mind, but to save both time and money
Yeah.
for yourself as a business owner, but also for your organization. And so we want you to gain tools and simple strategies. This mini course will take people beyond the surface and takes a hard look at what drives and motivates you. It's a
Mm.
tool that'll help you put your finger on current and past coping techniques. And it includes videos for educational tools, steps, so you can break the cycles of burnout because it's
Mm.
actually a cycle and a pattern. There are worksheets and journal prompts for each video lesson that you can go through at your own pace. And I want, your audience to take part of it. It retails at $1,000, and the worksheets retail at 500, but I'm busting it down today for your whole audience at the low price of $97.
Okay.
And that's a no-brainer. For some of us, that's an
Absolutely.
expensive dinner with
But
the
you
family.
haven't told us how they can access it.
Oh, easy way to access it. There is a coupon code that will be right in the show notes. Just type in the brand CY 2025. And that's going to honor that price for anyone that listens to this podcast. You get it 97. And then you also get a debrief with me. And I'd love to, because it's not everything we can say here in 20, 25 minutes to continue that conversation
Yeah,
with you. So make sure
absolutely.
you grab it and grab it now. Don't think, oh, I'll do it a year from
Absolutely.
now. If the stuff that Ash and I were talking about resonates with you, do this now. Handle these things today if you want to save both time, money, revenue, and also increase psychological safety for yourself and your teams. Let's get into it.
That's a great call to action. I'm going to ask all our viewers and listeners to go and check out Jahmaal Marshall's Burnout course, and we will have more details about in the show notes as well. Thank you again, Jahmaal, and good luck.
Ash, thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the brand called You.